Welcome to Mysteries to Die For and this toe tag. I am TG Wolff and I'm here with Jack, my piano player and producer. And this is normally a podcast where we combine storytelling with original music to put you at the heart of a mystery. But today is a bonus episode that we call a toe tag. It's the first chapter from a fresh release in the mystery, crime, and thriller genre. Today's featured release is The Stuff of Murder by Kathleen Marple Kalb. All right, we are going to jump right into this one. It is a goodie. Chapter 1, Unholy Mess. Everybody loves a good public shaming. Nowadays, we do it on social media. But back in the day, people showed up at the center of town or at a church to do it in the old-fashioned way, face-to-face, and maybe whipped to back. There's plenty of fun for the shamers, old or new school, not so much for the shamee. Well, until somebody gets hurt, or worse. Just ask everybody who'd come to Congregation Beth Shalom that pretty day in May for the thrill of seeing a movie star and a big dramatic scene, and got way more than they bargained for. Did we ever? It was supposed to be fun, spending an hour or so observing the streaming service crew shooting the prestige production, very loosely based on the Scarlet Letter. Brett Studebaker, who'd been the crush of choice of many of the locals and not-so-locals when we were teenagers, was hoping to revive his career as the Reverend, and this was his climactic meltdown at the pulpit. Yeah, I know. See what I mean about loosely based? I was in an out-of-the-way spot with some of my best buddies, Rabbi Dina Aaron, EMT Captain Tiffany Medina, and Garrett and Ed Kenny, hoping we could wring a little enjoyment out of the shoot that had become a serious pain in our tushes for the whole town. Not to mention all of us, individually and severally, though I was probably the only one who was actively praying for the crew to leave. My friends are much nicer than me. Studebaker patted the priceless Bible on the pulpit, licked his fingers and turned a page, then changed his mind and licked again and put it back. I winced as if he slapped me. In the hope that he'd treat the book with care, I told him the truth. It was an irreplaceable 17th century piece that had survived a terrible ocean voyage, 5 or 6 wars, plus fire, upheaval, and tragedy in 2 different families. No one was really supposed to handle it without gloves. Now his spit was on it. I probably should have just lied and said one of the local witches had cursed it. I winced again as Studebaker took a swig of what I hoped was water from a metal tankard that he'd grabbed from the Historical Society dining room, and then fussed with his cravat some more. There'd been 3 emails about that blasted cravat just this morning. I'd forgotten how aggravating consulting was, and resolved yet again to stay with my day job running the society and its living history museum just a few steps from the synagogue. Until about 10 years ago, what we know as the Beth Shalom was the Congregational Church, an absolutely perfectly preserved mid-18th century sanctuary that was on the National Register. The temple was looking for a new home when the dwindling Goyim were looking to sell, and the town fathers and mothers wanted to keep the building in use. And that's how a Reformed synagogue ended up in the prestige spot on the Green in Unity, Connecticut, the very definition of a classic New England town. It was a truly lovely building, and just as I picked up a little consulting here and there, Dina brought in a few extra shekels for the building fund with the occasional documentary shoot, concert, or lecture event. The town was had never hosted a real movie before, and we'd all thought, the town had never hosted a real movie before, though, and we all quickly come to the conclusion that it was way more trouble than it was worth. From the Green outward, the center of town was clogged with trucks and trailers and mess for weeks. We didn't even get much economic boost because our perfectly nice local inn and our 2 absolutely magnificent Italian family restaurants weren't fancy enough for the movie types. All we got were the few measly techs and lower-level production folks. We were thoroughly sick of it all before we even got to this big scene. Thankfully, the last shoot in town, even if there would be a lot more work back in Hollywood. They were doing several major sequences on location first, and then finishing the rest of the film on a soundstage. I had the feeling that had a lot to do with keeping Brett Studebaker happy and home. Well past his action hero prime, he was apparently hoping to show a new side of himself as a serious actor, but didn't want to be far from his cushy life. The only side I'd seen in my limited contact with him was arrogance, that mug being a prime example. He saw it on a tour of the Society's museum, proclaimed, "That's the Reverend's tankard," and scooped it up, carrying the thing like Gollum with his precious, even as I protested. The fact that he was apparently incapable of hearing a female voice saying no worried me a little bit. The tankard actually worried me more. I was left hoping that the thing really was pewter, as it appeared to be, and there wasn't anything weirder than lead in the alloy, because something funky could definitely have happened back in the days of silversmiths. Not that lead wasn't bad enough. I assumed that he'd be done with the shoot and the piece before any serious metal poisoning could take hold. But still, every time he drank from it, I shuddered. I shuddered more when my smartphone beeped with the mail notification. Studebaker had a million tiny questions, and it was my job to answer them all, since I was the ranking and paid expert on staff. And that's literally. I am a duly accredited authority on colonial, early American, and 19th century household items and personal property, i.e., stuff. Stuff, in the less elevated meaning, was about to hit the fan right about then as Brett Studebaker started his scene in the pulpit, a marvelously carved old wooden box looming more than 10 feet over the sanctuary floor. He seemed normal enough when he climbed up the windy little staircase, but now it was getting weird. He hung on to the edges of the pulpit, writhing and shaking the whole thing with his bulk, his piercing blue eyes glassy, his far less than authentic salt and pepper mane disheveled. Method acting, I figured, though I thought that was out. The movie crew didn't seem bothered by it. They barely even noticed. The camera and sound operators and the small army of support people who made it all happen gave no hint of particular interest or concern at Studebaker's behavior. The director, a geeky guy with the bad retro glasses, had been the screenwriter or two until the last one left in some sort of last-minute creative dispute a week before the shoot. As had become his habit, he sat there looking terrified about what he was putting his name on. Some people step up when life comes for them. Others, well, they curl in a ball and hope it doesn't hit them too hard. It was pretty clear which one he was. Clustered around the director's chair was a much smaller group of guys, and they were all guys, who seemed to be neither terrified nor disinterested, but at least kind of paying attention. Mostly middle-aged, all dressed in the same variation of California casual, they looked pretty bored too. The producer, Greg Holman, was an older guy with dead eyes that I talked to a few times. He seemed to be the most bored of all. About the only one who was really focusing on Studebaker was his assistant, a swaggery little bro who treated everyone who wasn't a potential groupie with disdain. I figured he was pretending rapt interest because he had to. Still, I realized, as Studebaker took a big, ragged breath, it was showtime, and I suppose we might as well enjoy it. "Fly from me, demons!" he shouted. "I'm just an old Lincoln scholar," Garrett, originally my academic mentor and now the dad I should have had, quietly observed, "but I'm pretty sure that's not Nathaniel Hawthorne." "It's not." I swallowed a giggle and nodded to the director. "It's that guy. He's the screenwriter, too." Ed snorted. He's a former state trooper, not an academic, so he doesn't have to be as diplomatic as his husband. Nothing worse than some mope in love with his own words. Since Garrett still occasionally wrote journal articles under what he archly called his maiden name, Kozowitz, he tried out lines on Ed that might have been just a teensy bit of subtext there. "Shah!" Dina hissed, using her grandmother's much nicer way of saying shut up. Her grandmother probably looked just like her, too. Tiny, furious redhead. Enjoy the show. Tear it apart later, Tiffany said, with a wicked gleam in her amber eyes. Dina's serious rabbi mien slipped a trace. Yes, but behave now. Garrett pulled his round face into a regal and serious line and adjusted his wired-frame glasses. Ed sighed and stepped into his default at ease stance, still looking like a cop, tall, spare, and always alert. Tiffany and I carefully didn't look at each other and kept our gaze on the pulpit. We were on the floor near the front, just far enough away to be out of the shot, but much closer than most of the spectators, who were in the balcony over the sanctuary, ranged on the side benches so that the camera could shoot from above. "Loose me, you demons!" Studebaker cried out, this time looking as if he were really in pain. He let out a deep, awful wail, hanging onto the sides of the pulpit and rearing back, almost howling like a wolf. The mostly accurate costume pilgrims in the pews, most all college-age kids from New Haven, gasped and murmured in character. The locals, up in the far reaches of the balcony, just shook their heads. This might be New Haven County, Connecticut, but it's still New England, and we don't go in for histrionics. A couple of the older ladies, docents at the society, were muttering something, and I had no doubt what it was about. What an absolute mess the streaming service was making of Nathaniel Hawthorne's perfectly lovely book. I was equally sure I would hear about it later. Studebaker looked down at the amazing Bible, a gift from a now dispersed founding family that normally occupied a special case in the society foyer. He put his hands flat on the pages, almost clutching them. I could see a crinkle in the thick paper. My stomach twisted. I took a deep breath and I tried to tamp down my anger. Method acting. Hell, show some respect for a sacred object that survived about 3 centuries more than you have, fool. Garrett patted my arm. He's not a mind reader, but it's close sometimes. "Forgive me, my lord, for I have sinned," howled Studebaker, thankfully moving his hands off the Bible to the pulpit edges again, then running them down his face, and now really starting to thrash around in simulated agony. The tankard rocked. I feared a splash, but apparently he'd swilled enough of whatever it was, we were at least spared that danger. He thrashed some more. Something creaked. Dina, who still had nightmares about the certified restoration contractor's bill for the last time they shored up the pulpit, never mind the disrespect to the building, well, she bit her lip. She was furious too. I bent down and whispered to her, "Bill him for the repairs. I will if I have to." The muscle in her jaw twitched. "Don't think I won't." "Oh, forgive me." "Don't think so. He didn't need to expect any absolution from me or Dina. Not that rabbis really do that." "Please." Studebaker ripped at his cravat, pulled it away, and pounded the pulpit as he howled, his face turning a strange shade, his orangey makeup suddenly standing out. Is he having a seizure?" Tiffany whispered. "Should I do something?" "Method acting, I think," I hissed back. "Weird old white guy stuff." Ed coughed in a way that meant he was stifling a laugh, and so did Garrett. They're not exactly the usual old white guys. Tiffany gave him a sparkly little eyebrow raise. My lord, what have I done?" Studebaker continued wailing, warming to his theme and alternating between pounding on the pulpit and thrashing. The whole thing, box, stairs, supports and all, a good 10 feet above us, was shaking. I glanced back to the pilgrims, who seemed to be stunned into silence, but clearly still in character, and to the spectators in the balcony. Most of them now just looked bored, though a few, like May Tiltson, were watching with considerable interest. May volunteers at the society, and while she's 80 if she's a day, she likes a fine-looking man. I suspected that transfixed expression had as much to do with the fact that there was a pretty nice expanse of rather manly Studebaker chest visible with the cravat on. If I hadn't known what a jerk he was, it might have been worth a look, but I've always had a hard time separating a guy's hotness from the rest of him. "I have sinned!" shouted Studebaker. His voice cracked on the last word, and he let out another horrible nonverbal howl. His face had a strange grayish cast now, which was a little off. I'd have expected him to be red from exertion. "Are you sure he's acting?" Tiffany whispered, reaching for her radio. 90%? I hissed back. "Sin!" Studebaker cried. "Sin! I am a sin!" He suddenly stopped on that last syllable, looked down at the congregation for a moment, and then reared up on the pulpit again, letting out another of those horrific wails. Then he thrashed around one more time, knocking over the tankard, this time almost splashing the Bible. Finally, apparently struggling for breath, he took his hands off the lectern and fell away, almost as if pushed by some unseen force. Demons, maybe? Maybe angels protecting the Bible. Thank you. It probably made an awfully good picture. Right until he hit the pulpit door. His weight carried him straight through it, and his height over the stair rail, which might have caught a much smaller man who built the church. It was only when Studebaker landed with a sickening wet crunch, 10 feet below, just behind the bema, that we realized this wasn't the movies anymore. All right, so that is the first chapter of The Stuff of Murder by Kathleen Marple Kalb. So this is an amateur sleuth cozy. Dr. Christian Shaw, who was our narrator, but I guess who didn't introduce herself in that first chapter there. She is a mother, a widow, and the director of a historical society. She is responsible for the 17th century Bible and the pewter tankard, which you just heard all about, used by the lead actor in a movie very loosely based on the Scarlet Letter. When the actor dies, dramatically, Christian's old stuff is at the heart of an investigation. And as you probably guessed, where they go, she goes. The bottom line, The Stuff of Murder is for you if you like cozy mysteries, charming characters, and everyday old stuff. All right, so here is my review. One of my favorite things about The Stuff of Murder is the characters. Kalb does a wonderful job of giving the primary characters distinct voices and appearances, making the story easy to read. Christian Shaw is 6'1" with flaming red hair. Her son Henry is 5 foot tall while he is in 3rd grade and has a photographic memory. The fathers she should have had are Garrett the academic and his husband Ed the retired state trooper. And last but certainly not least is the handsome, philanthropic, and very tall state's attorney Joe Poley. Then there are the other parents, society volunteers, and townspeople. This is an amazing and really heartwarming cast. The setting is small-town Unity, Connecticut. As with most small-town cozies, the nature of the town with its tensions and conflicts of people too involved in each other's business is an amusing counterpoint to the main mystery. This is the source of much of the information that Christian uses, as well as the bane of her busy days. Brett Studebaker, who won't say you met, but you saw, is a 50-something actor looking to launch into the next stage of his career on a period film based loosely on the Scarlet Letter. Brett is filming a pivotal scene, acting in the pulpit of the church-turned-synagogue some 10 feet above the floor. When he goes off script, only Christian and the locals with her notice the odd behavior. Brett falls from the pulpit, breaking his neck. But it isn't the simple accident that someone wants everyone to believe. The leading theory is poison, introduced through the pewter mug the Historical Society lent to the film. I really thought this mystery was a throwback to an older style of mysteries where conversations and not physical evidence is the primary tool of detection. Christian pieces together the small facts she learns into a chain that will catch the guilty. It's hard to discuss the logic of the mystery without giving too much away. Suffice it to say that the motives and action of the guilty are consistent and follow logically, at least in their own minds. The Stuff of Murder is a character-driven story that would be enjoyed by readers who love cozies, as well as those who prefer traditional amateur sleuth mysteries. The Stuff of Murder by Kathleen Marple Kalb, was released from Level Best Books and is available from Amazon and other online retailers. And check it out now because Book 2, The Stuff of Mayhem, is coming in November of 2024. For those of you who are regular listeners to Mysteries to Die For, you You probably recognize Kathleen's name, and you get a little sneak preview into Christian's world because she and her family were the topic of Sorry Not Sorry, which just released earlier this season. So check that out. And while you do that, I will introduce you to Kathleen. She describes herself as an author anchor mom, not in that order, an award-winning weekend anchor at New York's 101 Winds Radio. She writes short stories and novels, including the Ella Shane and Old Stuff Mysteries, both from Level Best Books. As Nikki Knight, she writes the Grace, the Hit Mom, and the Vermont Radio series. Her stories have appeared in Alfred Hitchcock's Mystery Magazine, Black Cat Weekly, online, and in anthologies, including ours, Mysteries to Die For. She has been shortlisted for the Derringer and Black Cat Novella Awards. She and her husband and son live in Connecticut in a house owned by their cat. So that wraps up this toe tag. Come back next week for the first part of another 2-part episode in Season 7 Games People Play. Army is the featured game in Did Not See That Coming by Ken Harris. All right, Jack, the floor is yours. Take us out.